It is day 152 of the second Trump administration and week one of the war between Israel and Iran. Earlier today, the president spoke to reporters and said Iran could have a nuclear weapon within months or even weeks. Watch this.
What intelligence do you have that Iran is building a nuclear weapon? Your intelligence community has said they have no evidence that they are at this point.
Well, then my intelligence community is wrong. Who in the intelligence community said that?
Your director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard.
She's wrong.
But the president also said he still wants to be a peacemaker. When asked about his two-week deadline on a possible U.S. strike, Trump said he's giving Iran a period of time and 2 weeks would be the maximum. My colleague Andrea Mitchell spoke to the Iranian foreign minister about that looming threat earlier today. Watch this.
I think it's up to, Americans, the United States, to show their determination for going for a negotiated solution. We were in the middle of diplomacy when Israel attacked us. They had perhaps this plan in their mind, and they just needed negotiations, perhaps, to cover it up. We don't know how we can trust them anymore. What they did was, in fact, a betrayal to diplomacy. There are sayings by President Trump, his tweets, his interviews, who is clearly saying that we have done this. Obviously, and very clearly is saying that the United States is leading this war. So as far as we are concerned, the U.S. is complicit to this.
European officials also gathered in Geneva today to press Tehran on both its nuclear program and the possibility of a diplomatic path to end the conflict. But Iran made it absolutely clear there will be no negotiations as long as strikes with Israel continue, and we all know they have. Today, a fresh round of Israeli strikes targeted western Iran, while retaliatory strikes hit southern Israel. All right, let's bring in our nightcap. It is an excellent group tonight. Pulitzer Prize winner and NBC national security editor David Rohde joins us. CNBC senior analyst and my dear friend Ron Insana, Eddie Glaude, Princeton professor and MSNBC contributor, and Tim Miller, host of The Bulwark, where he is 24/7. The amount of content this man is putting out is extraordinary, and former communications director for Republican Jeb Bush. All right, David, educate us here. Israel said it is prepared for a prolonged campaign against Iran. How long is prolonged in your mind?
2 weeks. I'm using President Trump's terminology there. I don't think the Israelis expected Trump to do this. I think they wanted a quick and decisive victory. So this is, Trump has thrown a curveball, as he often does, without a clear end in sight. So I don't see this extending beyond several weeks, but I do think, I think the Israelis will continue to carry out strikes, but, I think they're unsure what to do in the wake of Trump setting this 2-week deadline so unexpectedly.
But that's sort of exactly it. It seemed like Netanyahu thought he had Trump convinced, but the Israeli military can't destroy this nuclear site on its own. It needs the U.S. military, so aren't they sort of boxed into a corner if you're Israel?
Yes, I mean, they were relying on the B-2 bombers, this American bunker buster to hit Fordo. That's the most important nuclear site in Iran. It hasn't been damaged yet. It's, there's enriched uranium buried under a mountain there, and it's this U.S. weapon that could possibly penetrate that site and destroy it. So Israel doesn't have those weapons. And there's an element here, though, of unpredictability in the next 2 weeks, in that it's, maybe Bibi is talking about possibly trying to strike Fordo with the weapons, the jets and the bombs that Israel has. There's pressure on Iran to continue firing ballistic missiles at Israel. How many defensive missiles does Israel have to keep fending off these Iranian attacks? So I don't think there's a pause here, but the situation is not any more stable than it was before Trump put out this 2-week deadline.
Ron, we heard from a whole bunch of voices this week, those who want the U.S. to take action, that strikes will be quick. But don't we always hear that? You covered the invasion of Iraq. And I feel like that was the message we heard then. And look where that got us.
Steph, you're absolutely right. The only time it was true was repelling Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait in 1991. It was a 48-day war. He capitulated, surrendered, moved back into Iraq, withdrew his troops, set oil fields on fire as he left. But that was the fastest military experience we've had in the Middle East. You know, if you look at both Afghanistan and Iraq after 9/11. Those were multi-year engagements. There were attempts at regime change and nation building, which obviously didn't go well. And so the question here, as is true with most, I think, policies emanating from the Trump administration, is what exactly is the end game? Can you destroy Iran's nuclear capability with one bunker buster bomb? And it's doubtful from everything that I've read, it would take multiples just to incapacitate for a period of time that Fordow nuclear enrichment facility. So it's very difficult to say what happens here. And if anyone is contemplating regime change, we all know about the difficulties there. It's not done by air, it's done on the ground. And I'm not sure with 92 million people in Iran, that's a war that the United States really wants to involve itself in.
Did you add the 92 million people because you know Ted Cruz likes to watch? Tim, what do you think about all of the above?
I noticed that Ron got a good friend in the intro, so mostly I'm going to invite you out to drinks next time I'm in New York so I can get upgraded for the next intro.
It's just a way to remind you that there's room for improvement, so here you go. You're on.
Good to know. Good to know. I mean, look, the thing, I was talking to Dan Shapiro, who is Biden's ambassador, or excuse me, is Obama's ambassador to Israel and Biden's Middle Eastern advisor, who's supportive of the strikes. And we were kind of hashing out this very question of, like, could it be quick? Because there's an element to this where there is a single objective, right, going after the nuclear site. But the thing that is, I think, nagging in the head of some of us who are watching this is, do we really trust Bibi to want it to be quick? And there's been a lot of rhetoric coming out of Israel, out of Bibi and his advisors about how this might be a moment for regime change. They've been unbelievably successful. You have to acknowledge that, taking out military leaders in Iran and in Hezbollah. And so, like, there might be a temptation to say, let's just this might be the opportunity to finish the job, and then you get into a much expanded conflict. And then on top of that, you have Donald Trump over here in our country, who is completely erratic, who does not seem to be decisive in this situation at all. And you could imagine him, wanting to not get involved at all. You can also imagine him feeling like he wants to be a winner. You can imagine him bungling us into the war. I just think that there's a very wide berth of options, of possibilities right now, and a lot of them are rife with risk.
Erratic is kind of exactly what I want to zero in on, because while the president isn't going to show his hand, the erratic nature of this makes it so hard, right? On one hand, he says he may or may not strike Iran. Now he's saying it's a 2-week maximum. If I'm Iran or I'm Israel, how do I read this? The president is not giving any sort of clear message, and the stakes almost couldn't be higher. Eddie?
Well, I think you read it as for what it is, and that is that you cannot really trust whatever comes out of Donald Trump's mouth. I think for me, I'm just very unsettled by it all, Stephanie. It feels too much like the Iraq War, the drumbeat of war, the bloodlust. I'm worried about what it means. I mean, he opened the segment with this debate where Donald Trump just simply dismissed, right, the intelligence. I mean, it's Tulsi Gabbard, but he just dismissed it out of hand. And so I don't trust a word that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth. So, and I think I have the evidence for why that's the case, even though he occupies the Oval Office. But I don't know why, as Americans, we should trust him to lead us in this moment. That's domestically. And so I don't know. I can clearly understand why Iran and Israel might not trust him as well.
I want to go back to that point. You had Donald Trump very publicly dismissing Pete Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard, right? Here's what intelligence has told you. And he's basically like, intelligence, they don't know what they're talking about. How vulnerable, Tim, does that make us when the world is watching and the president is dismissing the very people who, in theory, hold the vital information that would put the president in a position to make decisions?
This is the key question. Are we better off with Pete Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard in the room or out of the room? And
he picked
it speaks to Right. Well, yeah, he did pick them, and it speaks to just the absurdity and the insanity of his choices, and the fact that the Republican senators all went along with this blindly because they, were worried about some election 2 or 4 or 6 years down the road, and so they saddled us with a weekend Fox and Friends co-host running the Defense Department and with Tulsi at DNI.